What's up? Welcome back. In this episode, you're going to see how to solve day 4 for the Advent of Code in 2022 with Ruby. We're going to talk about the range class, the set class. So there's a couple fun little Ruby nuggets in here. The project for today is that we have to handle some camp cleanup. Elves are assigned different sectors, and we're given a list of assignments where someone is supposed to clean section like 2 to 4, and then someone else is supposed to clean section 6 to 8, and we need to find which assignments have overlaps in the puzzles. So within this first example, 2 to 4, this little visualization down here is actually the best. So 2 to 4 and 6 to 8, they don't overlap at all. At the end, our output for this puzzle is going to be the number of assignment pairs where there are overlaps. So this one doesn't have an overlap, this one doesn't have an overlap, this one overlaps just on the 7, and this one overlaps the entire thing. So the top set covers completely this bottom set. So we would say like this bottom set is a subset of this top set, or this top sort of like assignment of sectors. And then this 6 is also fully included in 4, 5, 6. And so what we are trying to do for part 1 is to find the pairs where one of the assignments fully contains the other assignment. So in this case, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is fully contained inside 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then also this 6 is fully contained within 4, 5, 6. Those are the only two sort of assignment pairs where there's full containment. The rest of these, there's not. So that's like what we're trying to figure out. Let's just jump in and get started. Okay, so we're going to make day 4. And in here, what we're going to do is we're going to have our same little end at the bottom, and we're going to drop in our sample input. And a lot of this is going to be string manipulation. So we need to figure out how to get like this 2, 4 and 6, 8 to represent the assignments for 2 different elves. And then we also need to convert them to integers and do a few different things. So let's say that like data is going to be data.readlines, and then we'll say results are data, and we're going to map over that and chomp. That will give us just without the new line. And then let's also map and we'll split, but instead of splitting on the empty space, we're going to split on the comma. Okay, and let's just see what that gives us to start with. Okay, so this, again, this first section here is just calling chomp on each of the lines so that we remove the new line. And then this here is going to split each line on comma. And so we should get an array of arrays where we have kind of like 2-4 and 6-8 in each of the arrays. So let's do that. So we're going to say Ruby day 4. Okay, so now we have an array of arrays where each element is an array of the string 2 to 4 and 6 to 8. So what I want to do now is split these further so that we remove the dash and then we have just 2, 4, 6, and 8. So what we can do is inside of this same split here. Now you'll notice too that I didn't use single quotes. That would have worked just the same and we would get exactly the same result. But I started off with using these slashes because this is how we can define a regular expression. And what I want is I want to split on either the comma or the dash. And that'll give us these arrays where the pairs are combined inside of the array. But what's nice about that is then we can like pretty easily map over that and convert all of those into integers rather than strings. Let's see the integer values. Fantastic. Okay, now what we want to do is combine each of the pairs in the assignments so that we can see the range from 2 to 4 and the range from 6 to 8. So now what we want to do is just say dot map each slice, so line dot each slice of 2 dot 2a. So that should give us now like a pretty nested situation here. Okay, so now we have an array of arrays or of like tuples, maybe you want to say, where we have 2 to 4 and 6 to 8. So now these are in a format where we can take this 2 to 4 and make it a Ruby range. So a range is, there's a range class, and we can say dot new, and if we give it like 2 to 4, then that will give us this range. And you may have seen it in this like dot notation where we have A is the letters from A to Z, And so now we can say a dot member is there a member here with the letter T? And that will tell you like, okay, yes, this thing is inside of the range of A. So by creating a range from 2 to 4, this range 2, we can say dot 2A, and that'll give us the array that kind of explodes out the range from 2 to 4. So what's really convenient about working with ranges is that we can convert them also to sets. So if we say require set, if we require the set class, and then we say like r.toSet, this is going to convert it into yet another data structure. So we have a couple different data structures here. We're working with a range data structure that gives us like a minimum and a maximum, and then you can explode that to have all the values in between. And we're also going to work with a set, which is a set of unique values. The reason we want to use set is because there's methods on set that will allow us to check if something is a subset or a superset, and that'll be really handy. So for instance, if we wanted to say, we'll say like R2, this is going to be a new range. And we'll say that this new range is going to go from 1 to 6. So R2 is much longer than R. So now we could say something like R2.toSet.subset of R. And that also needs to be a range. So R2 is not a subset of R, but R is a subset of R2. So that kind of gives us the ability to like check if something is a subset or of another range. So what we want to do now is we're going to map over this again. And this time, what we want to do is convert each of the pairs into a range and then convert that range into a set. That doesn't actually work. So let's say map. Okay, so now we're still getting each line, right? And then each line is going to have 2 arrays. Okay, so then each of those arrays are going to be converted into these sort of ranges where we're going to have some like A and B. So we'll have A and B. And then we could say range.new of A and B. And let's just see what we get here and if that is going to map up to our expectation. Okay, so now we have the ranges in their sort of like range notation of 2 to 4, 6 to 8, 3 to 2, or 2 to 3, 4 to 5, etc., etc. So now that they're in this like range format, what we can do is convert them to sets if we wanted to. So we could also just as easily come up here and say range new.toSet. Now, anytime we work with sets, we actually have to require the set gem because it's not part of Ruby by default. So we have to require it. Same thing with JSON or whatever. Okay, so now each of our groups here, or our assignments, are combinations of sets. They're like tuples of sets. So in the first assignment, we have on the left, we have a set. On the right, we have a set. And what we want to do is we want to count up if the sets overlap, right? So now we're at the point where we actually want to reduce our list of sets down into some count. So what we want to do now instead of map is call reduce. And we're actually going to use our accumulator is going to be a number. And we will increment the accumulator, or we'll return like the next count if the pair of sets, if one of them is a subset of the other. So here we can say something like, okay, so we're going to get the count and we're also going to get the line. And this is going to say something like if line.first.subset of line.last, or line.last is a subset of line.first, then we want to increment the count, otherwise we don't. So we actually don't want the if statement here, and we can make this a ternary, and we're going to return count.1, otherwise we're going to return count, and that should give us, I think, what we want. So now we run this and we get back to number 2, which according to the example here is correct. But this is a little gnarly. So I want to do some cleanup to shorten some of our lines and make it a little bit more concise. So instead of passing in line explicitly here, I'm just going to remove all of those and then change this to _1. And _1, we're using like the numbered argument to the block. So that makes it much shorter, at least to read those first few. And it still works as expected. The next thing we want to do is rather than calling this line and using line.first line.last, we can actually destructure that line into like A and B directly in the arguments here. By using the parentheses, we're kind of like extracting that out. And so here, now we can just say, is A a subset of B, or is B a subset of A? And if so, we want to return count plus 1. Otherwise, we want to return count. So this is going to use this reduce thing to count up our results. If we run that again, that looks good. Now, another thing we can do is, in order, like if we wanted to make this range a little bit simpler, instead of using range.new, we can use a.b and use that sort of range notation to convert it into a set. So that's cool. All right, so this is looking pretty good. I'm pretty happy with this, and I think we're ready for the next part of the exercise, which is to grab our input. So let's grab our puzzle input here. So we're gonna say copy all of that, and we'll make a new file called input, paste all of that in. Now inside of day4.rb, what I wanna do is say, if there was an argument passed in, then if argv is empty, then let's use the data that's directly in this file. Otherwise, let's read that from a file. So file.readlines of argv. Okay, that way we can say Ruby day4 input, and that will use our sort of test input that was for our puzzle. So we get the number 580, which is correct for part 1. All right, so now part 2. Part 2, it seems like there's still quite a bit of duplicated work. And now we need to know if the pairs overlap at all. So before we were trying to figure out if the pairs overlap completely. Now we want to know if the pairs overlap at all. So what we can do now is go back into day 4. This actually gets simplified a little bit. This is the solution to part 1. We're still checking, like we still want to use sets, or we still can use sets to check to see if there's an overlap. And there's another set method. Instead of using subset, what we can do here is use intersection. So we can say intersect. So if the sets intersect, then we want to count up. Otherwise we don't. So if we run this against just Ruby without our input, we get back the number 4, which matches the example assignment pairs and how many of those overlap. And given our example input, so we can run this again against our input, then we get back 895, which was again the puzzle answer. So this was a fun exercise. If you haven't seen reduce before, we went through that a little quickly. There are a couple other videos on the channel that talk about reduce. If you have questions about it, let us know in the comments down below, and we'll try to get more into talking about reduce. Again, this is like another one of those solutions that just has this pipeline of something.map. And at the end, we're collecting it all up, in this case, using reduce and printing out the results. So what a beautiful and expressive language. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate your time and attention, and we'll see you in the next one.